Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Well, I was uncommonly excited, I tell you, earlier this week when the first trailer dropped for 28 years later, the latest in the 28 Days saga, which began back in 2002 with Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's 28 Days Later. And then a few years later, the sequel, which they weren't directly involved with, 28 months later. There's been talk ever since of a third film, and Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have often said that they thought there were more stories to be told. And there are more stories to be told, because we were told last year that the third film, 28 years later, was going to go into production, followed by 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which is being filmed now, and a third film. I think these three films are all being filmed pretty much back to back. The first one of these, 28 years later, is finished, it's ready to go. First trailer dropped this week, and that inspired me to take a look at the original 28 Days Later. The trailer, I'm not going to react to the trailer or say much about the trailer of the new film, but it looks terrific. It looks like a really well budgeted post-apocalyptic chiller, and as you know, if you watch this channel, I'm quite fond of a post-apocalypse. Anyway, I've gone back to look at the original, which I haven't seen for years, so let's talk about it. As you will know, I do like my post-apocalypses. I've always been fascinated by this idea of society collapsing, the world ending, whether it's through some disease or alien invasion or disaster. I think that the British post-apocalyptic movies have the edge over American ones. If you look at the stuff that we get in America, we get things like The Walking Dead and The Last of Us and lots of disaster films in the 70s and 80s. 2012, this run of films that we've had about the end of the world. But they always have a Hollywood gloss. Even Walking Dead and Last of Us, they're gritty and they're down and dirty, and they have a sense of apocalypse. And there's one currently screening in America, which is coming over here in the new year, called Earth Abides. But they're obviously very American. They have that American slant to them. But I think when Britain does it, it's very relatable. It's very down to earth, and it's something that you feel is just around the corner, or could be just around the corner. I'm thinking of shows like Survivors, the BBC's drama created by Terry Nation, which will be coming up in the new year, incidentally, on a video on this channel, which was about 99% of the world's population being wiped out by a flu variant, a virus of some sort. An incredibly bleak and hard-hitting series for its time. It was remade in about 2008, wasn't quite as successful, wasn't quite as effective. And we've had things like Day of the Triffids, we've had things like The Death of Grass, and we've had a particular form of British fiction which depicts the end of the world in no-nonsense terms. And I think I mentioned in the Day of the Triffids video this idea of what was called the cosy catastrophe. British disaster stories. A Wrinkle in the Skin is another one, which is about a massive earthquake which disrupts the whole world. And I just find these stories incredibly interesting, but the British perspective on them is always incredibly dark. There's often a bit of optimism there, but sometimes they're incredibly bleak because it confronts the reader or the viewer with the reality of civilization stopping and how people who have survived it try to pick up the pieces and carry on and create a new society from the ashes and the ruins of the old society. Watching 28 Days Later again last week, my God, this is a good film. This is very probably the best depiction of an apocalypse situation that I think has ever been put on the screen, certainly in the UK. It's an astonishing film. Part of the reason I think that the film is so effective is the fact that a lot of it was filmed on Canon digital cameras, digital filming. One of the earliest examples of that sort of technology being used to make a feature film, which gives it a graininess and a reality to it that puts you into the action. It hasn't got the gloss that you expect of a normal feature film. It's gritty, it's dirty, it's grubby. It looks like a film shot in a world that's been torn apart. A lot of people complain about the picture when you see it on Blu-ray or high definition, for example, that it does look very grainy, and the improvement in quality from a DVD to a Blu-ray isn't noticeable. It isn't, because it was made digitally. It was made because those cameras are easy and they're portable. They get in and film things and get out quickly, because they had to do a lot of filming on deserted streets and locations in London early hours of the morning. Digital cameras made that doable without huge setups and huge rigs. They just go in and shoot. which makes the film so powerful and memorable, because it just has that look of almost found footage in a way. The camera's moving in a way there aren't elaborate setups. It's done in a cinema verite style, dare I say, where you're in the middle of this with these people who are enduring this extraordinary, devastating apocalypse. And the film is clearly inspired. I know Danny Boyle and Alex Garland both admitted that they were fascinated by George Romero's Night of the Living Dead films. Day of the Triffids itself was a huge influence. You'll see that from one of the very first scenes in the film, where the lead character wakes up in a hospital, which is completely taken from Day of the Triffids, as indeed is Rick Grimes waking up in a hospital in Walking Dead. That's a fantastic way to tell this sort of story, with somebody from the old world not realising that the old world has died while they've been incapacitated. The film starts with a group of animal rights activists who break into a research facility to free some chimpanzees, which are being exposed to videos of violent behaviour and civil unrest around the world. Unbeknownst to them, the chimpanzees are being infected with a new and hugely contagious rage virus. 28 days later, see what they did there? Bicycle courier Jim, played by Cillian Murphy in his first high-profile leading role, he wakes in hospital having been in a coma following a road accident. The hospital's abandoned, there's no one around, it's in disarray, and he clothes himself, and wandering around onto the streets of London, Jim finds the city utterly deserted. There's nobody around, it's a silent, deserted, dead city. He quickly discovers that the rage virus has spread across the UK and possibly further, and he meets up with two other young survivors, the resourceful Selina, played by Naomi Harris, and her companion Mark, played by Noah Huntley. Together they travel to Jim's family home in Deptford. Jim finds that his parents have committed suicide rather than succumb to the terrible effects of the virus. During the night, the house is attacked, Mark is infected, and Selina has no compunction about killing him before he can turn. Later on, exploring the city, Jim and Selina fall in with Frank, played by Brendan Gleeson, and his young daughter Hannah, Megan Burns. They've barricaded themselves into their flat in a tower block. They escape London in Frank's taxi because they've heard a repeated recorded radio message advising survivors to head north towards Manchester, where there apparently is a cure to the infection. En route, and very close to Manchester, which is ablaze on the horizon, Frank succumbs and is infected and is killed as he starts to turn by soldiers from a nearby fortified country mansion. Jim, Selina and Hannah meet up with Major Henry West, played by Christopher Eccleston. He seems to provide some succour, some sanctuary for them, but it soon becomes obvious that the three of them have jumped out of the frying pan into a very deadly fire. It's an extraordinarily powerful film. The images are just stunning and they burn themselves into your mind when you've seen them. Those initial scenes of Jim wandering around London are so powerful, so evocative and so simple. It's a deserted city, but scenes of the bus on its side, and especially the scene where he's wandering across Westminster Bridge and there's rubbish scattered about. The scenes at, I think it's Piccadilly Circus, where there's sort of a fence has been put round with pictures of people who have gone missing, people trying to find their missing family members. And when Jim wanders into a church and he finds what appear to be dead bodies lying in piles, one of them gets up and runs towards him, and then a priest appears, and he at this point doesn't know what the hell is going on. It's only when he meets Selina and Mark later on that he discovers what's happened, and he's sort of horrified to discover that this catastrophe has happened in the 28 days that he's been in the coma. And then we move across London, and these incredibly powerful scenes of the darkened tower blocks and the city dark and in shadows and nothing moving because everything's dead. These are of course the sort of things that the Day of the Triffids series did so well, of Bill Mason walking through deserted London. But here we see all these familiar landmarks around London that are just deserted and there's nobody around. And it's, testament to the filmmakers that they were able to get this footage. They got in early in the morning and they filmed this stuff. Traffic was held back. I mean, it must have been hell to organise, but the ease of using digital cameras made them be able to get this footage. I was reminded watching the film a few years back, several years back, I went to a wedding. I accompanied a friend of mine to a wedding, and a friend of hers at the wedding. We were sitting at the table having the meal after the wedding, after the ceremony, and I was talking to some guy there, and I can't remember who he was now. He was involved in filmmaking, and he mentioned that he'd been involved in making this film 28 days later. And he mentioned that specific scene about the bus on its side, how they filmed that literally in 20 minutes. They got in, had to put the bus on its side and get out. And it was all done in literally 20 minutes. I mean, it's a very simple scene when you see it. It's Jim sort of walking past this bus. But when you take into account that it's one of the busiest cities in the world, they had to get in with this bus and film it in a certain way and then get away again within minutes. As the film then moves away from London, it becomes even more evocative because you go out in the countryside and you see nature running free. There's a scene where they're watching these horses, unfettered, just running through the fields, joyfully, just living their lives. And then the tragedy as things go wrong and Frank gets infected, Brendan Gleeson. It's the first time I think I'd seen Brendan Gleeson. Obviously one of our best known thesps these days, but I don't think I'd seen him before in this film. And he gives a superb performance as this man who will do anything to keep his daughter Hannah alive. And the way that he loses his life is so tragic and so unnecessary. Then we get to the sequences where Jim, Selina and Hannah are taken to this fortified mansion that's been taken over by Major West and his soldiers. Major West is played, of course, by Christopher Eccleston. When this was made, he was only a couple of years away from becoming Doctor Who on TV. His performance here is astonishing. And what's interesting is that Christopher Eccleston is an actor who, one of his USPs is the fact that he's northern and he's working class. He talks here in a cut-glass RP accent. Very pronounced vowels, very distinct, very precise way of talking, which is very un-Christopher Eccleston. But it's a very powerful performance, and those scenes are particularly good because they get taken into this old manor house that's been taken over by these soldiers, and Jim and Selina and Hannah think, oh, we're sort of safe, we've got respite from the madness outside. But it quickly becomes obvious to everybody that all is not as it seems there, and that these soldiers are basically psychopaths, nut jobs. And Major West himself, he's looking after his boys, but he's promised them certain pleasures that they are denied. And this message has been put out to entice other survivors to the area. There's no cure. He's just trying to get survivors there to entertain his troops. And of course, when he tries to make Jim and Selina and Hannah his playthings, things go a bit wrong. They tried to get Jim out of the way, but that backfires horribly. And in fact, I was interested watching it. That's those scenes where Jim returns to the house to try and rescue Selina and Hannah. He himself is full of rage. He's not the rage virus, but he is possessed, a man possessed. He wants to rescue his friends, and he will do anything to get them back. And I think maybe here the film is sort of playing with this idea that we don't have to have a rage virus to become enraged. If the people we love are threatened, if the people that we rely on are endangered, we can become enraged, furious, killers. And he becomes a killer. He kills people. He unleashes Mailer, who's this tame creature, enraged soldier that they have chained up in the ground. He makes short work of the rest of the soldiers. It's incredibly dark. It's incredibly bleak. And at the very end of that sequence, Jim himself gets shot. Then we cut to another 28 days later. Jim has recovered from his injuries, and he, Selina and Hannah are living in a cottage in the countryside. A plane flies overhead and they put out a sign to attract attention. And it's a sort of an uncharacteristically happy ending for the film. Doesn't detract from the film, however. Doesn't detract from the raw power of the film. The terror of the film. Because when I saw this film in the cinemas, we were just starting to enter that period of the revival of zombie cinema. And we were getting things like Shaun of the Dead. We were getting the remake of Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, whatever it was. We were starting to get zombie things. I'd never seen these films. I'd never seen Night of the Living Dead. And I remember watching things like 28 Days Later and feeling a certain, not terror or fear, but the sort of dread of these sort of creatures taken over by this virus, and they just want to kill. And this is where it's important to differentiate the enraged in this film than your typical zombies, because these aren't the undead, these are infected people. And I think it's important to note that this isn't a zombie film. These aren't the zombies of traditional horror, the slow-moving shufflers, or even, I know there's been lots of discussion about fast-moving zombies and slow-moving zombies. 28 Days Later has rage victims are not zombies. These are not zombies. They don't eat flesh. They kill, they tear people apart, but they don't, from anything that I remember in this film, they don't eat people. They just want to kill them because of the rage, the terror that's in them. And that's an interesting counterpoint that goes back to the beginning of the film when the monkeys are being shown scenes of the terrible things that human beings do to each other. Warfare, unrest, fighting, anger, fury. And that is what creates the rage virus. It's really interesting element of the story, which I don't think has been explored perhaps as much as it could be. That's what this rage virus is, but we brought it about ourselves because of our own nature. Another interesting thing about this film is that, and I think it must be from the deleted scenes on the original DVD release, for some reason, I still have a memory, and I think you'll have to remind me if this is the case. There is a deleted scene where Jim himself has become one of the enraged, and I seem to recall a scene of him emaciated and wasting away, laying out in the countryside, sort of reaching out as a plane flies overhead. And I know that there was a different ending to the film originally, and that was changed when test screenings weren't particularly positive, which is why I was given this more upbeat ending. I haven't gone back to see if that is a deleted scene, but I have a distinct memory. And I was quite surprised watching the film when it had the upbeat ending. So if any of you out there can remember that particular ending, please let me know. It's not something I've imagined, because I've got this distinct memory of this emaciated Cillian Murphy, wasting away out in the countryside. And of course, interestingly, from the trailer for 28 Years Later, there is a scene where what appears to be Cillian Murphy rises out of the grass in the background in one scene. Apparently that's not him. It's somebody who looks a lot like him, and I think whoever was cast to play that particular role of an emaciated rage victim was picked because they had a look like Cillian Murphy. 28 Days Later is a sensational film. I watched it this week again. It has still chilled me. It still has its power to unnerve. It's so beautifully put together, and it has a rawness about it. It's not attempting to be glossy. It sort of asks us to examine the fragility of us as people, and how we can be corrupted, and how society can be corrupted and can collapse around us without us even knowing it. It's a superb film, and I will say, as I did at the beginning of this video, it is, I think, the best representation of the post-apocalypse that's ever been committed to cinema, certainly in Britain. And I'm sort of thinking about the American things that are glossier than this, and I think the fact that this does look gritty and earthy and grainy works to its benefit and just makes it more real. It's a sensational film, and I realise that at the moment it's very hard to find. It's not available on streaming. Unless you've got it on physical media already, you can't get it. You might be able to pick it up on DVD, but certainly you can't get it on Blu-ray. It's long out of print. And I suspect that there will be a re-release when the new film comes out in the summer. 28 Days Later is a masterpiece, and I absolutely love it. Because I love this sort of storytelling. It's not feel-good cinema. You don't switch it off and go, oh, the world's a wonderful place. You think, oh my God. But it's a great film in its own right, and I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 because it's great. Right, thank you for watching this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, here's an idea. Why not like and subscribe? It's come to my attention that 75% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed to this channel, which seems crazy to me because it's free. It's not a subscription like your Netflix or your Amazon. Just click the button and subscribe. You'll get updates to when new videos are out. You don't have to watch them if you don't fancy them. But it'll be nice to have you on board as a subscriber. And of course, as ever, leave a comment down below. It's always great to get your comments because they're always really interesting. And they're very sensible. And they're very intelligent and interesting and informative. So it's great to hear from you. So let me know what you think of 28 Days Later. Let me know what you think of the trailer for 28 Years Later, which has now become, I think, my most anticipated film of next year. So anyway, that's me done for now. I will see you sooner till I do. Keep taking the stuff.